Hello, 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 beautiful people. Welcome to another episode of Grief Heals. Today I am just having a conversation about the past couple of months, about being a divine human, about self-love and the difference between self-love and self-indulgence, the opportunity to allow people to be, because we are, without labels of needing one another to be right, wrong, good, bad, all the things that tend to create an either or cancellation of one or the other. So with that, I hope you enjoy and take part in this conversation. I can't wait to see what it opens up for you, and I look forward to hearing from you. And I'd also like to ask you to please, if you're enjoying these conversations, like them, share them, review the podcast, and help me get it out to more beautiful peoples like you. All right, that's it. And with that, enjoy the episode. Welcome to another episode of Grief Heals, the podcast where we explore how it is that grief heals us with our relationship with ourselves, with one another, and our whole wide world. I am your host, Lisa Michelle Zega, and I am excited to have another conversation. Hello. I am here and excited to be recording a new podcast. I was going to say a new Grief is Love, and that is really how I see grief. This is the podcast Grief Heals, and that is why I hesitated. And you know what else I was thinking about in terms of Grief Heals? So there is, now I could be saying this wrong, so I'll just tell you, this is how it lives in my memory. May not actually be the case. But there is the word whole, like H-O-L-E, or like a grief whole. There is the word whole, like W-H-O-L-E, right? Like something is made whole or complete. What's living in my memory is the way that healing and wholeness can be looked at through the same lens, and something about even the etymology of both words, that there being a connection. But again, I could be totally making this up. It's just something that I started remembering as I started moving my lips. So, but I've been playing with this idea, thinking about grief heals, and then, well, what do I really think when I'm saying that? And I'm thinking, well, grief wholes, like W-H-O-L-E-S. Grief makes whole. I gotta itch my nose. Okay, so I was thinking about that, and then I was also thinking about grief holes, H-O-L-E-S, like this idea that there are places within us that need love, like there are a feeling like there are holes within me at times that need to be made full, made complete, like where that substance kind of gets in there. And I feel a sense of coming together within myself, a sense of wholeness. It was interesting. I was talking to a dear friend today, and we were talking about bringing love, to the little girls that live inside us. And she made this comment. She said, there is a little girl inside me that is very different than the little girl that was once inside me. And she said, because this little girl feels whole, she feels like there is substance. She feels very complete. And when I reflected back to her, I was like, I have been watching you do your best to bring love to that little girl for 14 years. So it makes sense to me that she is feeling more whole, more complete. Another friend today sent me this image and it's a statue, and it's a person, like this slender seeking stone statue with its legs open wide, and it's sitting on a stool or something like that, and the head is slumped over and the shoulders are rounded, and you see the torso, and the torso is this big open circular what, like opening, right? And she said, Lisa, have you seen this? And it's talking about the holes that we experience in our losses. And I'm like, yes, it's such a beautiful depiction of how we can feel so just blown open and even empty. And I'm like, and that is the perfect depiction of what I mean when I say that grief is love, because what I'm actually saying is that hole that we sense is exactly what the grief is wanting to come to bring love to, that we might feel more whole, WHOLE, within ourselves. Whew. Okay, let me just shake that off and take a breath. If you want to breathe with me, just inhale and hold it at the top. Exhale slowly, just feeling your body relax. So I have been telling my friends, my family, people that ask me, like, how are you doing? And I'm like, you know what? I'm tired. I actually don't feel tired in this moment. And I recognize July was a very full month, and so was June. And I keep saying, yeah, my July was sandwiched by my husband having surgery, right? 30 days apart. Well, it is true that he had surgery 30 days apart. What I just realized is one surgery was in the first week of June and one surgery was in the first week of July. And in the midst of all that, I have had a schedule where I'm traveling a lot. And so I've been out of town, bookended by these things, and then my out of townness spilled over, right, like into his recovery. And I have trained, I want to say 6, 7 organizations this month. And I've been to Vegas and I've been to St. Louis, Missouri. Last week I mentioned that there was a surprise that I would be coming back from. So my middle son wrote a play. It's called The Time of My Life. And it was first performed in St. Louis. And on the 26th, Friday, July 26th is when opening night, and I got to be there, and I got to bring my mom, and then his Aunt Banana, took a red eye, and she came and joined us for the following night. And then I got to go to his church and meet several of his friends. And I got to hear some of his perspectives. So the play chronicles the life of a boy to man from the time he's 4 years old until the time that he is 40 years old. And can I just tell you, that play brought up a lot of feels inside me, right? Because I was looking through, in some kind of way, a perspective, a lens of my son. I'm experiencing my own lens. I'm like, it was very, I was experiencing so much that awakened in me. I was grappling with different things. And I started thinking about how there are so many different lenses we can look through. Even the story of my own life, I can tell a story through one lens, I can tell it through another lens, I can tell it through a variety of lenses without any of those stories needing to be right or wrong. And what's interesting about that, and maybe this will make more sense, it's the emotional story often that's being told, right? It's like, this is the way I lived such an experience, and the way it felt inside my own body. So since seeing this play, I have grappled with just a lot of different things, because there was the way that I was watching as the mother of my grown son. There was the way that I was remembering his childhood. There was the way that I was seeking to think about what he was thinking. There was a way that I was seeking to interpret the message that the viewer of the play was meant to walk away with. There was my own response of the message that I, through my multiple lenses from life, was walking away with. And just being with the complexity of my human experience, and allowing room for all of it. So I don't know if I'll come back to that, but I did learn a great deal. So I'm just going to table that for now, and then share what I'm thinking about, what really prompted me of like, oh, I'm going to record a podcast right now. So I got a call from a girlfriend today, and we were catching up as we often do. We allow these big, juicy gaps to exist between our conversations, and then we fill each other in, and we never quite have enough time and all the things. So one of the things, she was talking about a challenge she experienced with another person, and she wanted to know my take on it. You know how sometimes we just want to know, hey, I'm having an experience. Can you let me know I'm not crazy? It kind of felt like that. So anyway, she was sharing some of her response to something, and I told her, I said, I don't actually want to talk about that person or the details of that experience. May I just share what's actually coming up for me? And that's what I'd like to talk about today. So I was telling her that when I was younger, I would have such big sensations in my body. I mean, that felt like an earthquake happening inside my skin suit. Sometimes the sensations, and I said when I was young, and that really misspeaks, because this happens to me still today. It's not quite with the same frequency, in terms of having these cataclysmic moments within myself, but it does still happen. And I think the real difference is I have ways of helping myself to return to myself when this happens. I've got a little bit more space now between the stimulus, like whatever event occurs, whatever trigger, whatever activates me. I've got a little more space between that and my response, and more capacity to be with myself, to observe, to feel. Just the capacity to feel, to recognize what's going on in this body of mine. Okay. So anyway, when she's telling me the story, I recognize, oh my goodness, specifically when I had no context for how these big sensations would occur within me, like waves crashing inside me, like a sense that I am coming together and about to be swallowed whole, like the floor drops out from under me. Do you ever remember those it was like sometimes maybe at a circus? I can remember at Six Flags, you got into this cylinder and it like spun around, or how did it work? And then the bottom dropped out and you were like stuck. Your body would stick to the back, and you'd be floating without a floor beneath you. Yeah, so something like that. But when those things would happen, without really me needing to try to do this, I would come up with a story big enough, or a villain big enough, to match how out of control I felt inside my own body. So one story came to mind this morning, and I'll share it with you now. I would be so self-conscious on the dance floor that just anticipating getting on a dance floor could make me sick, could make me shake, right? Like feel like I'm going to throw up. My body would get shaky, my hands, my palms get sweaty. My whole sense of self would get clenched inside like I was bound up in duct tape. And I had a story around that. I had an experience when I was 8 years old, and my cousins telling me I didn't know how to dance to the beat that I danced to the words. And I just, wow, that story was so credible for me. I really thought there was something wrong with how I moved my body and how I respond to music within me, even though I love to move my body. Okay, so let's rewind. I am 21 years old. I am dating the man who later became my first husband. And he says, we were at a wedding, and he's coaxing me and really trying to lure me to the dance floor. And he loved to shake his booty. Okay, so he's trying to get the gal he's dating, who he loved, right, out on the dance floor. And I am getting tense. I'm sweating. I don't want to go. I'm really getting uncomfortable. And then a slow song comes on, and he begins to say, come on, all you gotta do is sway, I'll hold you, and it takes a while to get me out there. So by the time I take his hand and my foot steps on that wooden dance floor, the song changes, and it changes to like some kind of rumba or so. I don't even know what, but it was a dance where there's certain dance moves. That feeling that I was describing in my body, oh my gosh, here's what happens. I don't even know how to describe the sensations right now. I literally ran. I ran to the woman's bathroom. I shut the door. I shrink to the floor, and I start sobbing, locked inside of a woman's stall. He is knocking on the outside of the door, and he ends up asking a lady to go and check on me. And I am mortified, right? But when I go and I see him, do you know that inside me, I thought he was so wrong. Why would he knock and pursue me to get on the dance floor in the first place? Not as much to pursue me at the women's restroom, trying to get me out there. And my response to what happened on that dance floor was so big that I needed his actions that preceded that to warrant my response. So he needed to be a big enough bad guy, and I needed to find evidence of how selfish he really was to get me out there so that my experience could be validated. Now, this is sneaky on a number of levels, right? But this was my experience much of my life, that I, without even needing to conjure up the story, was already in a story of how bad another person's actions were, so that my response could be justified. Now, look, before I go any further, I do not hold a grudge against that part of me. I actually, not just on my own, I also lived in a culture who taught me that my brain was what really mattered. My cognitive abilities were what was important. Whatever happened inside my body, like, that was irrelevant. My body was just like a stick that carried around my head, and my teachers talked to me and reasoned with me through my head, through my intelligence. My pastor reasoned to me through my intelligence. Like, everything's meant to come down through my head, and what's happening inside my body, my head is supposed to be able to override. And the message was, hey, there's something wrong with you. Well, now we as a culture understand so much more about the nervous system, the wisdom of the body, our own neurobiology, right? Like the connections between our nervous system and our brain and in what we think and what we do in life. But I didn't have any of that wisdom back then. And I didn't recognize that things that were going on in my body were holding stories about things that my body was carrying, things that had actually happened to me or to my mama or to my ancestors. Like I didn't know how all that worked. Okay. I still don't know how it works in such a way that I could describe it on a technical level. You know who I would recommend for that? My teacher in this area is Irene Lyons. And is it Lion or Lyons? Lyons. I'll put a link to her nervous system work. But yeah, she's helped me a ton, and she's like an expert, not me. But when I'm talking about grief and love, and grief needing to find its way in to the places that to guide love into the places that have not known love, or to give love to the places that needed love but maybe got something else instead. I am talking about a full body experience. I am not talking like the way that I define love. Like, all right, I'm using a definition that I remember from 1 Corinthians, right? Like, love is patient, love is kind, love keeps no records of wrong. Love is long-suffering. Now, to use Eric Simpson, who produces this podcast, love is attentive, right? Love notices. Love shows up. Love witnesses. Love hears, right? Like, yeah, love is fierce. Love is fierce. Love nourishes. All right, so I am saying when I'm talking about love that we need nourishment to come into the places that have not been fed, the places within us that are hungry to be tended to, hungry to get sunlight, like a plant needs sunlight and watering, or if a plant had too much water, right? It needs to dry out, like the way that we would nourish any living being, any living organism. Love comes in that kind of a fullness. What I'm not saying is that love is self-centered, selfish, self-indulgent. Like the kindest thing I can do, and this is, we use this all the time, but if I am in a plane without oxygen, in order for me to give to others in the way that I want to be able to help on that plane, I need to put the oxygen mask on so that I have something to give, right? So much of the way that I learned about love was you don't care. You are not meant to care about yourself. Any sort of nurturing of the self is selfish, right? And so what I did for most of my life, not allowing or even knowing that my grief, my loss, my places of pain, my own suffering needed tending, needed witness, needed nourishment, that I needed to be nurtured back to health, I tried to give from a sickly place. And my giving was not generative or life-giving. In fact, I was often demanding. I was spiteful, resentful when I gave and gave and gave and gave, and my experience was I was not receiving in return. And truth be told, giving felt powerful, but actually getting to a place of even being able to let my guard down to to genuinely receive, I didn't know how to do that. And I can have so much compassion on myself because I was actually afraid to let my guard down. Let me say this one more time. I didn't even know my guard was up. Okay. So when I had that experience on the dance floor, by that time, I had come into the church where I was told that my past was irrelevant. Whatever I had been through, whatever my ancestors had been through, whatever my precious mother had been through was irrelevant because I was a new creature in Christ and the old had passed away. My job was to love without regard to myself. And I, like a faithful Christian soldier, marched to that drum, and I worked very hard to do just that. Meanwhile, back at the ranch, in my body, I was having regular explosions. Y'all, I want to tell you that when I was afraid to have children, I was afraid to have kids because I thought that I might hurt them, physically harm my own kiddos, because when those sensations would happen in my body, the level of rage that I would often feel scared the living bejeebies out of me. And I tried to memorize enough scripture, to utilize enough self-control. And you know what? I did make progress. I did make progress, but when those sensations would come, I can remember the first time I heard the quote. At the time it was attributed to Viktor Frankl, but I want to say it's actually Rolf Rollo who said between the stimulus and the response, there is a space. And in that space is our opportunity to choose. When I first heard that, I was angry. I was angry because the time lapse between my stimulus, whatever activated, triggered me, and my response, I did not experience a space, which is exactly why I was afraid of having kids. And though I did not physically do violence to my children, emotionally, I did. So when I'm talking about grief being love and our grief guiding us to the places that have not known love, that need love to get in there, I am not talking about being self-indulgent. I'm not talking about playing video games all day. I'm not talking about any number of ways we might seek to gratify our pleasure while still not being attentive to our pain. I'm not against pleasure. I quite enjoy pleasure. I'm a pleasure seeker. And I love getting to give and receive love. I love getting to sit with myself even when I do something that I wish I had not done. Even when I defend myself in a way that keeps my ears closed to the concerns of those that I love. When I catch myself in those things, I come back to myself and I offer the part of me that in my eyes failed or blew it or hurt another person. I come back and I sit with her and I offer her love and her nourishment. And by her, I do mean me. I offer the part of me that blew it with another human being. I say, oh yeah, honey, I saw you interrupt him. I saw you defend yourself, and I feel it. I feel it when I act differently than my own value system. I feel it when I act differently than the way that I train in these workshops others to be with other people. And I feel it without judging her. Or I notice the judgment of her. I feel that. And I release the judgment. Or I simply feel into, this is exactly how I feel. And I'll let myself be with myself in all my complexity, in all my contradictions. And do you know what happens every time? And I seek to not use words so much like every and always and never, right? These absolute words. And I think I feel comfortable saying every time, because when this heart of mine receives love, it spills out. I today am passionate about the message that grief is love, because every single one of us matters. And the fact that somebody else might be suffering more than me doesn't mean that my suffering matters less. My joy matters, my pleasure matters, my pain matters, and so does yours. And so does everybody else's. And we don't need others to be wrong for us to be validated. So I'm going to circle back a few loops, okay? In the beginning, I told you that I got a call and was talking to a girlfriend, and then I shared my experience. Well, one of the things that she shared that was so profound was she said, I find myself, when I'm distrusting myself, looking for evidence that what I'm thinking is right. And often the way I find that evidence is somebody else being wrong. Now, she didn't use those exact words, right? But that was the message. And I identify with that so much, because when I catch myself needing another person's perspective to be wrong, which there was a part of the play, there was a part of the message of my son's play that I caught myself needing that to be wrong. I did. And that is a sneaky, sneaky way of keeping me from being loved. And if I'm not loved, that keeps me from loving others. So how does seeking evidence that my viewpoint is right keep me from being loved? Because it means that unless I find enough evidence that my experience is valid, then I don't just get to be loved without all that evidence. In other words, it's a way of saying, of denying my permission to just exist. Like, in other words, my existence must be defended with evidence. Is that the world that we want to live in? Because if it's not, then we need to say, oh, hell to the no. My existence matters because it is, because I am in the I am. You are, we are. Our existence does not need to be defended. So multiple people can have multiple perspectives, and they can all be allowed without needing to be advised, fixed, or saved. We can just look. I don't know what you're hearing in that, and I'm not going to go through and defend every nuance of every way that could be misconstrued, because it could be. Our experience is valid. Our sensations are valid. Love gets to go into the felt and lived experience of each human. We do not need to cancel one another out in order for each of us to matter and our voices to matter. And you don't need to agree with me for you to matter. We really matter because we are, each and every one of us. Somehow, some way, that's the message that grief delivered to me. And it's not so much that I care like grief, grief, grief. What I care is that we all get to be together and that we all get to be loved. Period. And I actually think that love generates love and an experience of interconnectedness and more love and more service. So if love, self-love, is not resulting in love, in how we are toward our fellow man, how we are toward ourselves, then maybe what we're experiencing is artificial and not love, right? I don't know. I'm just going to invite you to take a breath with me. I'm going to invite this to just be where it is, not need to be wrapped up with a pretty bow. Let you have your experience and recognize that we can all have our unique experiences and still be intimately interconnected. So just take a breath. We breathe the same air, inhaling, exhaling. One more time, inhale, exhale. Blessings, blessings, and I will be with you again next week.
You've been listening to Grief Heals with Lisa Michelle Zega. The podcast is produced by me, Eric Simpson, in association with Jump Up and Down Productions. Music by Kendalian, Drunken Nights to Sunday Mornings, and Stefan Carlin, A Calming Ocean, A Common Notion. If you would like more information about the work Lisa does, point your browsers to legityou.com. That's LEGITYOU. Lisa can also be reached at lisamichelle@legityou.com. This has been a Jump Up and Down production.